Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Patrick Tucker.
All right. Good afternoon. Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Tucker. I'm the Science and Technology Editor at Defense One. Thank you for joining us for this session, The Tech Revolution in Global Security, AI, Cyber, and Autonomous Dominance. And I love that this session and GlobeSec this year takes place in Prague, because we're very close to the anniversary, and then we're going to introduce the speakers. But just a little bit of kind of an intro. Who here is familiar with a Czech playwright named Karl Čapek? Raise your hands if you are. It's okay, it's okay. Karl Čapek, 1920, wrote a play called Rozum's Universal Robota. And this is the origin, etymologically, of the word robot. It's from a Slavic word that means slave. And in Rozum's Universal Robota, this is kind of the origins of all of our anticipation about the artificial intelligence future. It comes from 1920. In the first act, there is a wild, charismatic inventor. He creates a race of autonomoids to displace all human labor. The second act, he becomes outrageously wealthy. All human labor is displaced. And in the third act, the robota revolt and kill everyone. So that is the future of artificial intelligence that we've all had in our brains for a very long time, and we bring that projection to our understanding of artificial intelligence as it's actually happening now. But the folks that I'm going to speak with here today are going to outline a very alternative future for artificial intelligence that is being created here today, one that actually enables human beings rather than replaces them, one that is a tool that is going to create new capabilities within human operators, and one that is a subject of a tremendous competition, tremendous race between democracies, autocracies, and the free world. So please join me in welcoming our guests, Omran Sharaf, Kathleen Hicks, Oleksandr Kamyshin, and Richard Helmberg. Please join us. All right. So let me start with you, Omran. Omran is works at the UAE and manages a lot of digital transformation there. Tell us a little bit about what you do in the UAE first before we get into it, and then we'll go down the line.
First of all, thank you for having me here. And my main role is within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs currently. My background was in space program, but about 2.5 years ago, I was appointed within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an assistant foreign minister dealing with critical and emerging tech and advanced tech. Mm-hmm. And my main job here is to kind of try to ensure that the UAE has access to the best technology mm-hmm. and the best know-how, and make sure that we are part of the global effort when it comes to emphasizing responsible behavior and the proper deployment of such technologies.
Wonderful. Kath Hicks is a longtime friend of mine, former Deputy Defense Secretary of the United States Department of Defense. Just a little intro, who you are and what you do.
Sure. So as Deputy Secretary in the U.S. system, it's often thought of as the COO of the Defense Department, focused down and in particular in translating strategic goals into all of the various systems to deliver capabilities, and that manifests through the acquisition system, through the what I'd call the innovation ecosystem, or operational concepts and other elements that are warfighter-centric toward those same goals, and of course, very notably in the budget process and overseeing the allocation of resources and the big bets to be made for defense. That includes substantial investments during my time in AI, and the creation of whole new organizations, notably the Chief Digital AI Office, CDAO, to execute on a vision of joint all-domain command and control for the U.S. military.
Wonderful. Oleksandr, please.
Before the war began in Ukraine, I was working for the private sector, investment business, and when the war began, year one of the war, I was running Ukrainian railways. Year 2 and year 3, I was running Ukrainian defense industry. So now I can keep doing the same from the position of President's advisor.
Yes, and Richard, thank you.
Hey there, nice to be here. Representing Shield AI, US company, high-tech, providing mission autonomy through AI and drone systems, and as well vision systems, and really happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so these folks are at the forefront of a really critical mission area for all governments, which is moving new technologies into deployment far faster, and sometimes that causes changes in practices in bureaucracy. Sometimes smaller players are a little bit better at it than others, but the landscape of Ukraine provides a fantastic example of what that looks like when it works, and also the urgency of doing that. Just a quick note, please don't forget to use Slido. I'm told that you all have been briefed. We'd love to incorporate your questions as they come up. I can ask myself questions all day, but that doesn't necessarily serve the greater public. But in doing so, let me ask you, start off with Minister Sharif. How would you prefer?
Sharaf, Omran, O-M-R-A-N.
Omran, okay, wonderful. So the UAE started investing in both the civil and the military space in AI applications. When you're getting into that space from the beginning perspective from a government, and there's not like a huge legacy of different companies that feel like they own a little bit of it, how do you ensure that dual-use technologies are scaled responsibly, technologies that both serve a consumer base and also a military base or government base? How do you ensure that they are scaled up responsibly, and how do you make sure that those companies know that they can continue to serve you, but also the public in a way that meets both your needs and those of the public?
It's a very, very important question that I think till this day no one has a very clear answer for. Mm-hmm. However, we've done it in the past when it comes to critical and advanced technology, in which globally countries got together and were able to govern that technology. Today, we are dealing with a new set of challenges, and we're talking about a technology that is probably much more accessible than the technologies of the past when it comes to being dual use. So the way that we work together will have to change. The way that we approach it will have to change. Domestically, we're working on our internal laws and rules and guiding principles, but then that cannot be detached from the global effort. And with the current very polarized geopolitical environment, sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but that's also a big risk. So the way that we're doing it currently is that we're trying to be inclusive of our partners. The UAE is playing an active role in trying to converge the global views when it comes to technologies such as AI and other emerging technologies.
Yes.
And by doing that, we're trying to reflect that also within our domestic landscape and our guidelines and rules and ethics and rules to govern that. So the idea is not to over-regulate, but to regulate smartly, to emphasize responsible behavior, to bring transparency, and to make sure that we get the most benefit out of the current technologies. One thing I would like to highlight is that in the past, it was very easy to say everything is, like this is civilian and that's military.
Yes.
Today, that's, I think, impossible.
Yes.
Everything is dual use. Literally everything is dual use. So our approach to things should change. And now also when it comes to AI, we're not just talking about a transactional relationship with international partners, but we're talking about a strategic relationship. Why? Because we're talking about sovereign capabilities.
Yes.
We're talking about sovereign data. In the past, I would just procure a system, use it, put my sovereign data in it. Today, that has to be customized for my demography, for my needs, taking into account my values also and my cultural elements and the structure of my society.
Right.
So that requires our partners to be, international partners, to be much more engaged strategically. And the language has to change when it comes to how we define things, thresholds, and so on.
Yes.
In a nation that has 200 nationalities from different parts of the world, different backgrounds, different cultures living there, and with the minority of the citizens being part of the population. Our setup is very different than a country that is the majority are the citizens of a specific nation that come from a specific background.
Right.
So our thresholds will always be different. Our interpretation of extremism will be different, and how we deploy it will be different.
Yes, exactly. And you bring up something that I think is very important and will remain a theme as we discuss here, and that is the obligation of makers to be strategically engaged with their partners in a way that defense contractors in the past certainly were not. You would have a defense contractor that would go to a program executive that that would go somewhere, and they would they would respond to requirements that existed and would be formal and not move very quickly, and then over the course of 10 years you would get a jet that cost $90 million. And that's the rapid pace of technological change is as said, democratizing. And so there are unique, exquisite capabilities that all militaries may wish to have, but increasingly the space of advantage that you get from trying to build something specific for a military is vanishing because of the democratization of technology. So Dr. Hicks, could you talk a little bit about that from the perspective of your time at the Defense Department, striking that balance between the need to have big, exquisite, huge multi-billion-dollar programs and platforms to create military dominance, but in an environment where the democratization of technology rapidly erodes any advantage that you get from programs like that?
Sure. So I think I'll kind of cut to the end and come backwards. Cutting to the end, it's a yes and approach, a high-low mix, where your focus is first and foremost on the warfighter. It might be the warfighter today, meaning in the next 2 to 5 years, or it might be looking down the line at how do you want to operate for best advantage. And for each country, for each set of coalition partners, that may vary. The answer to that may vary.
Yes.
For particular scenarios. So, there's a lot of work. I mentioned earlier the innovation ecosystem in the US. There's a lot of work beyond tech that goes into how to fight for advantage. We do still have exquisite, I will call them high-end, high capital-intensive, multi-decade developmental programs that make a big difference to our advantage. And so we have to get better at that. Largely hardware, but still software-hardware integration. And then you're raising the democratization around a whole range of technologies and capabilities that we also have to understand how to incorporate much more quickly as they develop, largely software-centric. So we have to get better at a number of things at once. What we have faced in the US, and I think probably resonates throughout Europe, is this accumulation of challenges to our industrial bases, our manufacturing bases, and the defense piece of it, to Omar's point, the defense piece of it is really just a reflection of that broader dual use or capability base. We can't think of it, the defense industrial base, really as a distinct entity anymore.
Yes.
Stop there.
Exactly. So that's an important point, I think. Dual use technologies. An industrial base that is actually now open to everyone to participate in on a global level, and making sure that your alliances and partners have a firm group of companies around the world to rely on. It's very important here in Europe with NATO attempting to modernize, but a whole bunch of different companies in a whole bunch of different countries now competing for the attention of a larger whole. So let's turn to you, Oleksandr, because you are both an entrepreneur but also a warfighter. So you're an example of that person that is serving both roles, both as, in many ways, warfighter, but also technology development. Talk to us a little bit about how you see Ukraine using autonomy and AI in the near future, and also some of the challenges that you've experienced moving new technology to the front line as rapidly as you guys have been.
Well, actually, AI is part of all unmanned systems we use at the front line, and we try to integrate it in aerial, naval, ground systems. And since recently, we've been using autonomous targeting for strike drones, for kamikaze drones. And the last probably thing we are still waiting on the front line in scale is the swarm of drones. And that's something that will give us even bigger change on the front line. We don't have excess personnel on the front line. We don't have excess material on the front line, so we have to be smarter.
Yes.
So what we learn to produce in Ukraine, we call zbroya, and that's what we call the smart force. That's something that we try to override Russian scale with the smart approach we have. AI is definitely part of that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so that brings up, I think, something that's now incredibly important for all militaries. And the U.S. military, in many ways, is beginning to model that a little bit, becoming sort of more of a large military that more and more resembles special operations forces. And the Ukrainian military, in contrast to the Russian military, has many distinct advantages. One of them is, of course, a very strong non-commissioned officer corps, individuals with strong training and autonomy within the legal parameters to make their own decisions on the front line. It's a lot of trust in the individual non-commissioned officer as opposed to a bureaucratic sort of top-down approach. And that's, would you say, part of what enables this rapid innovation at the front line as well?
Well, necessity is the mother of invention. We have to be creative. We have to be smarter.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only way we can survive.
Wonderful. So let's turn to you, Richard, because Richard is with Shield AI. And who here is familiar with Shield AI, with this company? It's one of, I think, one of the most, there's a good handful. It is, I think, one of the more interesting and important drone, they don't just do drones. They're an artificial intelligence company, but in terms of what that looks like in terms of a thing, there are drones. And very early on, you guys were very active in Ukraine. Brendan Tseng, who's one of the co-founders, tells a story about exactly what we're talking about here. You brought a system called the VBAT. It's got a propeller at the bottom and little wings, and it kind of looks like a hood ornament, frankly. But it's an incredibly important system. It allows you to take off vertically, go towards a target, and you were using them on the front lines, and you were testing them with Ukrainians. And the story that was told to me, not just by Brandon, but by some others that were there, the Ukrainians told you at a certain level, which we'll not talk about, we're going to jam the GPS. Above that level, you should be able to use the GPS to hit a target. And we'd like to see if you can do that in training. And what was discovered is that actually the Russians were jamming the entire GPS spectrum, critically important for the way all drones that we today interact with as consumers operate. And the drone took off in the wrong direction and was safely recovered in a field. But within 24 hours, your folks on the ground working with the Ukrainians talked back to headquarters and came up with a patch that actually adjusted for what the Russians were doing. So you kind of reinvented some aspect of that in a day. That's the type of innovation that I think a lot of people in the Defense Department would say, how does that happen so quickly? And yet it happens. It happens all the time in bits. So talk to us a little bit about that, about how you're seeing the need to both have people on the front lines with warfighters, the risks there, and how you see that innovation cycle beginning to accelerate between maker of thing, warfighter, and target.
Yeah. It's been mentioned earlier today that you need to have support and you need to work very closely between the industry and the end user. If you cannot do that, you're not going to survive in this dynamic war as we see today. We learn our lesson. 2022, we delivered the first system to Ukraine, and we failed on deployment because we didn't have an in-country support in place. We didn't have the tight collaboration with the Ukrainian armed forces as we should have had, and the system in general was a bit too immature. 2024, we went back, we have learned our lesson, and we have produced a much more mature system. We had a full in-country support that could work very closely with the end user to provide updates when needed. And we have learned as well over the last 6 to 8 months here that we need to have people that can assist because, for example, EW and jamming can change over day. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot be on site, support and guide with that kind of work. So, for example, we had a very clear example of that where an engineering team received that one day we couldn't take off. Mm-hmm. So we were in contact back with the Home Office in the US, and we were constantly calling back and forth and sending information. Mm-hmm. The day after, we had fixed the problem and you could operate again. Yeah. So you need to have an in-country support. That is extremely crucial.
Yes, yes, and you also have to as a defense contractor, as a maker of things, you have to be willing to be there with your customer at a much closer level. But this brings up, I think, also another sort of key challenge, which is that this democratization function isn't unique to our partners and allies in countries that we like. You see Russia's technology abilities, at least economically, being aided by China. You see technology transfer between the two of them. You see North Korean missile development being aided now by Russia, and as an exchange of, part of their larger partnership where North Korean troops are moving into Russia to attack Ukrainians. You see Houthi rebels that are now using more sophisticated technology, in part because of partnerships with China and Russia. And you see small players and large players increasing their own capabilities there. So let me turn to you, Omran. As countries like China are rapidly scaling up innovation through state capital partnerships, how does your model of technology investment and global collaboration position you to keep pace? Because you've just brought up dual-use technologies. You need companies that can serve a government need, but they have to have also be there for a consumer base. How do you approach this in a way that is different from the Chinese model? And how can you keep pace with basically what is state-sponsored everything, which is now what we're seeing permeate the globe?
So when it comes to the UAE, of course, we have the government involved in certain initiatives, but then also we have the private sector leading certain initiatives. But let's just go back to the question of technology and capacity building.
Yes.
So when it comes to technology, UAE has 3 red lines. Mm-hmm. The first red line is our sovereignty. Mm-hmm. The second red line is our credibility. Mm. The third red line is the trust that we put in our partners and the trust that the partners put in us. We take technology security, and research security, and know-how security extremely seriously. We would never, ever allow any country to sabotage a partner through us. And if that happens, we take swift action. So these are kind of the principles that guides the UAE's relationships with its partners internationally.
Yes.
Like the US or any other country in the world, we have to work with East and the West. Mm-hmm. But then we've demonstrated over and over that we take our credibility and the trust that our partners put in us very seriously. Mm-hmm. If you look at our space program, when it comes to Earth observation missions, South Korea are our main partners in optical systems.
Yes.
When it comes to deep space missions, the US is our main partner. When it comes to radar satellites, Finland is our main partner. Mm-hmm. When it comes to our nuclear program, South Korea and US is our main partner. Mm-hmm. And today, similar models we're demonstrating in areas such as AI. And then if you go to defense, the UAE is a signatory to an agreement there's an agreement signed between it and the US on defense technology security. So it's not something that we've not done in the past. It's something that we've demonstrated over and over and over. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, when it comes to the aspect of dual use and how kind of the line between military and civilian is becoming more blur, export control becomes much more challenging. Yeah. And that's when the question of the multilateral export control regimes come into play. Mm-hmm. And what is its role in governing the governance. So what I can tell you, even though, let's say, UAE is not formally abiding or adhering to, let's say, something such as MTCR or WASNAR, but our rules, guidelines, laws mirror the guidelines of regimes such as MTCR, so on. The reason why we're not joining, there are different reasons. Unfortunately, sometimes countries use that as a political pressure, which no other country would accept to be used against it. Or sometimes it goes as simple as when you read the guidelines in English, it's very different than what is written in Arabic.
Yes.
So I think we need to rethink also, like from our experience, for us to be able to work in the future with emerging and critical technologies such as AIs and other. Because today we're very reactive about AI, but we're not talking about politically. We're not talking about quantum. We're not talking about genomes. We're not talking about nuclear fusion. Those technologies will change the geopolitical landscape. And I don't think politically people understand that. Yeah. So to address that, we need to rethink the way that we work together and how we govern
Yes.
and control those technologies and the research around those technologies.
Yes, and I think this brings up something else that's really important, which is influence over standard setting. And that sounds very dull, but believe me, it's actually incredibly important when you're talking about how to keep an alliance together in terms of the daily stuff that they use and buy. And NATO, in many ways, is a standards organization, everyone adhering to similar standards. And the U.S. played a very leading role in helping to establish parameters by which startups around the world could understand rules, could build their own enterprises and deal with different countries and companies based on based on U.S. influence over how to do that and make money. But you also bring up quantum, and which will be better enabled through artificial general intelligence. And the prospect of strategic surprise, this technology is advancing so quickly that there is I was just at a big AI conference in Washington, D.C., and this was a uniform sort of plea, is don't underestimate how quickly the influence of any one country will dissolve should another country like China develop strategic a capability, particularly around AI, that is exponentially superior to what already exists. And quantum is another one, as is breakthroughs in genomics. So let me turn to you, Dr. Hicks, because you've warned a lot about strategic surprise and the importance of staying ahead of it with things like generative AI and quantum computing. With all of that accelerating, what are you concerned about right now when you think about strategic surprise, the United States and allied partnerships' role in that competition right now? Are we still in the best place to capture it? And how long will that last, if so?
Well, first on the question of specific strategic surprises, I'm going to take the out that my old boss, Bob Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, used, which is we have 100% hit rate in terms of our ability to predict the future, which is we're always wrong. So I think that then leads to the answer, the broader answer, which is having an investment, and I don't just mean that in resources, a focus approach that is managing risk. For the US and like-minded countries, that means what can we do collectively? Where are certain industries, sectors, countries best positioned to take advantage, and how do we make sure we are able both to manage across those range of risks? And you've laid out several of the texts. In the US, while I was in the government, we had 14 technology areas that we explicitly defined within the Defense Department as priorities. But that just gives you, the fact that there are 14 and there are probably 20 left not included in that list gives you a sense of...
You can't have 14 best friends.
Exactly. So don't tell any of my 14 best friends that we just said that. So you have to be able to manage across that. But back to your really the key, I think, question in there is how do you make sure you don't lose the opportunity? And that means playing to your advantages. Our advantages are free minds, free people, free markets. That is not the China model. That is not the Russia model. They have a statist approach of civ-mil fusion, and that's not the way for us to go. There are some advantages they can get out of that. I think those are temporary, and they're overcome by the model that we have. It means working collaboratively. As I said, if we look at ourselves together, we are so much more capable. Think of how much we're learning from the Ukrainians right now.
Yes.
Think of how much others, let's pick the UK, is working with Ukraine right now. That ability to be more than the sum of our parts, we have to leverage that opportunity. That includes universities, research labs, government funding, and of course, those great innovators in our private sector. So I think if I were to look at a strategic miss, it would be if we miss that opportunity to be what we can be collectively.
Yeah. Well, let me turn to you, Oleksandr, because she brings up a very good point, and that is all of the things, companies like Shield AI, the things that they're taking away from their experience working with Ukraine, and Ukraine is very open to letting folks come on over and try things out, and we'll help you fix it. And I think you've contributed a lot of very important intellectual property to major U.S. defense contractors for which you have not been properly compensated. But if NATO allies want to help more effectively. And this is something that I think NATO leaders realize is incumbent upon them. What are the, aside from that conversation about rounds of 155s, et cetera, what are the technological or industrial capacities that they should be investing in and potentially transferring, working with you on the front line, giving you to help defend Europe?
At this point, I would say, as I mentioned in my previous speech, that we still need the swarm solution, coordinated attack solution. Mm-hmm. That's something we didn't find across our partners. That's something we tried to find in US and other nations, but we haven't found that. So we have to develop that, and that's something we have to work out under jamming, under severe frontline conditions, and that's something that will fly finally, and we would be happy to share that back to our partners. Outside of the swarm and AI, I would say that at this point we are pretty much well settled with all the technologies we need, and still some technologies come from the West for testing in Ukraine, and I would say that at some point we would be happy to share those results back to our partners. Again, in this war, so much changes in a year that technologies working well today would be not perfect in a year. So it's not about the product, it's not about the technology itself, it's about the proper environment, the process, and the source that is getting all of those things together and make it finally evolve into good products and good companies and good teams. So it's about the environment more than the technology itself.
Okay. So we have a lot of great questions from site. I'm going to move to a few of them, and I'll have more in case they run out. But I think we should be pretty good. Keep putting them in, though, because it's always a contact sport to get in your question and have it be the best one. But a lot of them are for you, Oleksandr. Spiderweb on Russian territory. Who's familiar with Spiderweb? This was the great big, very dramatic operation taking out Russian strategic bombers, which was quite an embarrassing day in Moscow. Spiderweb on Russian territory was successful. What does this smart operation say about the future of threats around the world? And how high-tech was it? And I'll actually open that up to anybody, because you all have to think about what it means that this military was able to get at the heart of the strategic capability of a much larger military and do so at tremendous economic scale. But I guess that goes first to you. What does that say about the future threats around the world, and how high-tech was Spiderweb?
First of all, speaking about how high-tech it was, we're not in the competition for high-tech, we are in the fight. So we don't try to be the most high-tech operation of the world, but that one was probably delivering the impact for European security more than any other operation in decade. We got 1/3 of Russian strategic air fleet out. So it's not about being the most high-tech, it's about being the most efficient. If that's FPV drone over 2,000 kilometers from the front line, it's fine. We are fine with that. I'm sure that this operation would be researched and written down in details, and people will learn from it. And I'm definitely not the one to speak more about how this kind of threats should be addressed by other countries, and how we can make the world more safe, considering this kind of threats we have. In Ukraine, we don't think about that now. Whatever we get in our hands, we try to fire it to Russia to make more Russians good Russians. So it's all about that.
Yeah, let me take that to you, Richard, because I think that's a really good point that also speaks to exactly how high-tech any frontline solution actually is, and it might appear the future is just here. It's not evenly distributed, is a quote that I really like. And the other part of that operation that I mentioned before with Shield AI and the drone that you fixed in 24 hours, after 24 hours, it played part in an actual Ukrainian operation and took out a Buk standard missile launcher, a $90 million piece of Russian military that, and believe me, they put more protections around that than they do than their conscript conscripts. So you also have been hitting high-value, contributed with the Ukrainian forces, hitting high-value targets at very low levels of investment very rapidly. How do you see this? How does Operation Spiderweb, how replicable is that from your perspective right now at a larger scale?
I can just talk about our VBAT in that sense, but it's used every day today, and of course you need to have a rather amount of high tech in a system today being used in this war. You need to withstand heavy EW and GNSS denied environment. You need to be able to fly at a certain distance to hit the target, which is far away from the front line, and that is really what we have succeeded to prove, that we have a system that can fly 100 kilometers inside Russian-controlled area. We have a decent amount of high-level sensors that can find and track targets, giving back to the ground control station a really high accuracy of high-value targets, provide that information either through, it could be Link 16, or it could be on ground-based link to weapon systems or up to fighters that can actually hit that target. And you need as well to have systems that can be on station for a number of hours. The VBAT can be 5-6 hours on station following the mission if it's success or if you need to re-engage again. So I think you need to have a rather high level of technology built into the system. But then it's to a decent cost. And I think that is what the key feature for the VBAT is really, that it doesn't cost like extremely high value drone today. Yeah. So the cost benefit is really important for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one from Dan Castro, Center of Data Innovation. You should all look up the Center for Data Innovation. It's a very good DC think tank that talks about basically the backbone of AI as we now understand it, which is data, which is telecom, and we all play a part in that. But very interesting question. U.S. Secretary Hegseth, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, said he wants, quote, lethal AI, not equitable AI. Should the EU and allies focus less on AI ethics and more on modernizing military AI capabilities? I think that that's a great one for you, Kath Hicks, because, and also for you, because as you point out, there are different national perspectives on ethics, but you also must meet a public, and you also must meet a military need. And the Defense Department has a very long list of AI ethics principles that really was put in place actually under the first Trump administration, and was really instrumental in helping bring on board Silicon Valley partners and partners like the French, the Europeans, not the French, the Germans. No, not the Germans, the French, sorry. But a lot of European partners to partner with the United States on AI collaboration within the military construct. So, yes, what do you think of this notion that we should have lethal AI and not equitable AI? It seems perhaps like a false choice, but talk to us a little bit about this. Should the U.S. lessen its focus on AI ethics, particularly in military contexts? What would be the cost, or how might that work?
I think I'd start by postulating that I have yet to see a use case where the U.S. approach to autonomy and to the use of AI has in any way inhibited where the tech is. The tech is developing, and the way in which the rule set develops, I think, is still open, and it should be. That said, the way to think about this is, there's always going to be human judgment at this point in how that the on the loop, off the loop is the wrong way to think about it. But in warfare, there's human judgment, and that's where we are today. And the state of autonomy and of AI can live within the way we have framed it and allow us to make maximum use of it. We're constantly in the US, and I'm sure other countries do the same thing, looking at use cases to try to understand, again, where that edge is and if there are some tricky situations. And I think we're going to have to work our way through that, just like any other kind of approach inside warfare. warfare, whether that's a system, whether that's the way in which we think about civilian casualty, et cetera. There is nothing specifically unique in this case other than potentially the power of the technology we need to best understand. So that's what I would say. The U.S., I think, does have, and as you pointed out, a long-standing and begun really in the first Trump administration, and we doubled down on that approach to AI that we think brings in more partners. I'll say again, I think that collaboration approach really is an advantage to us. Traditionally, the adherence to the Geneva Convention and other ways of war that demonstrate both that we can use our advantage in warfare, but that we are just in the conduct of war, that has proven out, I think, advantageous to us, not just an inhibitor. You see the Ukrainians think about the difference between the Ukrainians striking air bases, for instance, and aircraft on air bases, and the Russians striking hospitals, schools, et cetera. There are strategic advantages to being who we are as a people and sticking to our principles. It doesn't necessarily just cost us militarily. We do it because it brings strategic advantage to who we are and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Well, yes, Omran, these words from Secretary Hicks says, lethal AI, not equitable AI. Is that alienating to you at all? And how do you think about this question of how much ethics should be in AI within a military construct for you and from partners that you might want to engage?
So I'm not sure if we can say, when we talk about equitable AI, we mean ethics, 100%, because
yes.
I think in this context, maybe, again, I don't want to put words in Secretary Hicks's mouth, but I think these are separate issues. Like when you talk about lethal AI versus equitable AI versus AI ethics, I think these are three different topics.
Yeah.
And I think in this context, I think it was more about focusing on AI for defense. Okay, and I think all of them have to happen in parallel. When you talk about ethics, you cannot ignore ethics. I think if you do not, you run into a huge risk of this falling in the wrong hands, whether it's irresponsible states or irresponsible non-state actors. And I think the ignoring the ethics part is something that we need to be a little bit careful of.
Yes.
But then when we talk about lethal AI for defense purposes, we should not just think about it as it being lethal in the sense that it takes out let's say the other side. We need to think about it as a tool, again, to de-escalate, as a tool to bring peace rather than just kill and destroy. And when it comes to equitable AI, I think that's where I guess there's slight overlap with aspects of ethics when it comes to responsible use of AI.
Yes.
And I think irresponsible actors should not have equitable access to AI.
Yeah.
Responsible actors should have equitable access to AI. So this is why I wouldn't link it fully to ethics. I think that should happen regardless. We shouldn't stop. But then the equitable access to AI, that's something that should be linked to certain criteria and requirement. And I think that's something that we should not undermine or not take seriously.
Yes, that's very good. Clearly, you have a very good law background because you really took apart the question. Well, because the question was Hicks said lethal AI, not equitable AI, and then Castro said, joined onto it, how should we have a discussion around AI ethics? And you disentangled them to get at the literal meaning and create that better understanding of the three different categories. So I did notice that Dan Castro failed to get one past you there, so I appreciate that. But I want to bring the same question to you, Oleksandr, because as has brought up, the Ukrainians in many ways, in part to appease the United States and other partners, were fighting with kind of one hand behind your back in terms of not hitting every target that you could hit, in terms of meeting the expectations of whether or not you might fire certain rockets beyond a certain range and things like this, really trying to meet the expectations of others. And that is part of the reason why you continue to have great public support, I think, among all of Europe. It really does show a contrast between Ukraine and your adversary. But do you feel as though ethical constraints, particularly around autonomy, are in any way a barrier or slow you down on the field?
No, we don't feel those slowdown because of ethics. And again, ethics is not the domain for Ukraine now. Whatever we can, we use to get Russians out. At some point, we will get back to thinking about making our products and making our technologies working well in the peaceful world, but not at this point.
Yes, and I think it just showcases again, like this is something that's needed for people to stay together, for partnerships to actually happen. And if you're going to have partnerships with people that don't have a sound ethical basis, then those are your friends. I don't know what to tell you, but go ahead and enjoy their company, because that's not going to be fantastic later on. Here's one that I think is very...
If I can interject, just again, it's not actually effective.
Yeah.
The Russians they haven't in 10 days taken over Ukraine.
Right.
In fact, they're more than 100 times behind that schedule. So there is a tendency to frame up, if you have no governor on any technology or capability, you're going to be more at an advantage. And I'm not convinced that has been proven here.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also speaks to that question of how are you making the AI? The U.S. And other partners have always had a kind of approach of human-machine teaming. So human beings working with an artificial intelligence entity, working together, the operator's capabilities are lifted up. Their intent is still there. And Western military leaders like that because it leaves human command and control, and if somebody screws up, you can fire them, as opposed to someone bureaucratically pressing a button and realizing a lot of effects without actually an understanding of what's happening on the battlefield. That is a contrast that speaks to an approach to AI as well as an approach to the military in general. And I think one is clearly showing to be superior. So the political landscape in the U.S. threatening the leadership of U.S. technology. Is the political leadership in the U.S. threatening the leadership of U.S. technology?
Yeah, I'm just going to say what I said before, which is I think there's some inherent advantages across the organizations and countries we're representing here. And if you're going to make the most of the moment, you need to be able to take advantage of them. Obviously, that includes strong government funding and focus on innovation, but it also includes that ability to partner effectively across both countries, to coalesce together, and not only the private sector, but our university systems, our labs, et cetera. And those who are innovating have to want to work with you on their products or their services. So you want to make sure that that opening that's been created around defense, and Patrick, you mentioned that earlier, in terms of companies wanting to work on defense, in large part because of what they've seen happen to Ukraine, and also in part because of what they've seen the Chinese do throughout the Western Pacific, but most specifically around Hong Kong, and then how they've treated their companies in terms of IP and other issues. That's a comparative advantage that we have. It's not necessarily going to endure on its own. We have to continue to make the case that we're the place to invest that innovation.
Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I'd just like also to jump here and just talk about, in general, political leadership in AI, whether it's the US or any other country. I think when it comes to technology, emerging tech, and AI, I think we really have to, all of us, take a step back and not be emotional about things. We need to understand that countries have their national interest. And each country have their own tools and means to translate those national interests into policies that serves their national security needs, national security concerns, and so on. I think countries that understand that early on, and the ones who are able to navigate with that, are the ones who are going to get the most out of it, of these opportunities. And I think sometimes, countries need to think about whether they should think too much about regulating and putting kind of systems in place to protect, or should they be focused more on putting the resources into running faster than other nations?
Yes.
So I think this is where the political leadership in AI and other emerging tech will come, is the ones who know how to navigate well, the ones who understand their partner's national interest and not being emotional about it, and then the ones who are able to run faster than others rather than putting systems in place, overdoing it.
I think that's a really good point. It's a good note to end on. There's any administration, you like them one day, wait 5 minutes, they might change their minds. And there's a lot of things that this administration can do to increase technology leadership. There's a lot of bureaucratic barriers that people have been trying to push away for 40 years that there's always an opportunity now. And I think that that's what we're getting a sense of. There's tremendous opportunity right now, in part because of such smart people being in control of such capabilities in a way that has never been possible before. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel for this wonderful conversation. And yes, thanks.